This series is going to be the 1 year review for the F4i. I'm going to go through the whole bike, break down what I liked, what I didn't like, what problems I had, some stuff that I might change, and then I'll give a more detailed breakdown of how I ran certain parts, hoses, throttle cables, electrical, whatever, throughout the whole bike. Anything that I may have missed in the initial build series. But we're going to run through the entire bike. We'll front to back. Today we're going to start with the front end. So on the front end here, we still have the Dunlop Q5S, the EBC V rotors. I did switch to EBC pads, which I'll explain why in a little bit. And then this front fender here, you can see that I cut down the front portion as well as a little bit on the rear here. Still have the seal savers going, HEL lines, stock suspension's all the same. Okay, so this front tire, the Dunlop Q5S, I'm neutral on it. I wasn't particularly fond with it. Like, it wasn't too surprising in terms of performance, and it, wasn't too negative where I was really wanting to get rid of it right away. I chose to run it because Jason Britton started running it, and I wanted to match Dunlops in the front and Dunlops in the back, just so I could always be running Dunlops. But a lot of people run, Pilot Power 2CT, and I think I'm going to give that a shot. This tire's kind of getting ran down, so I don't think it's going to have much life left, maybe in the middle of the season or something like that. But I wasn't like blown away with this thing. It did well. Like, I'm not rolling huge stoppies or anything like that. There were times where I would find that this tire would lock up, or it would skip on me, or kind of slide out a few times in the lot. And I did have people there rolling a couple hundred feet on the 2CT, and they didn't have any issues. So whether that's a skill problem or it's the difference in the tire or whatnot, that's up to you to judge. But I don't know. I think I'll give the 2CT a shot. For rolling burnouts, it did perfectly fine. I never really got into drifts yet, but I don't think it'd have an issue with that. So overall, I mean, it's okay for me. Maybe if I had a little more skill on the front end, then I could offer a better opinion on its performance, but I'll probably switch to 2CT. In terms of brakes, so we got the EBC V rotors here. I also have EBC pads in these front calipers. I originally had the Honda OEM pads, but I think I didn't break them in long enough. I started doing too many stoppies and burnouts where I was holding the pads onto the rotors too soon, and I think I could have glazed the pads. I checked the rotors to see if they were warped, and they're not, so I can conclude that nothing's wrong with the rotors. The problem I was having was I would get noise when I would brake, kind of like a squealing or a squeaking, which the performance wasn't affected there at all. So that was never really a big deal. It's kind of just more annoying. But the other problem I would get is, like, right before I would stop, the whole front end would kind of shudder. And I don't know if that's, something with the pads. I've read that the EBC pads have that type of feeling for a little bit until they're broken in. But, I feel like I put a decent amount of time on those pads to where that should have kind of been gone. It's definitely a lot better than it was. It's still semi-noticeable, like right before you stop, come to a complete stop, you get a little shake, and that's kind of unnerving when you're trying to roll in the front end, and you're coming in hot, and you pick it up, and you feel that kind of judder or shake, and it's like only right when you come to a complete stop. So I'm gonna try and maybe put the OEM rotors on and some fresh pads and see if it's either of those items, and kind of help me diagnose what it could be. Like I said, it's not too big of a deal, but it's something that I noticed, and it's kind of annoying. I don't like having to feel that. It also might have to be with my steering stem. That nut was loose, so maybe that's causing some movement, but I think it has to do with the front end here. Something with the rotors, the pads. I'm not entirely sure, but I did put some brake grease on the back of the pads this time when I put them in to see if that would get rid of the noise. Maybe that will get rid of that judder. Maybe it's the tire. I don't know if the tire, the way it grabs. Who knows? But that's kind of for the front wheel and the brakes. That's what I've noticed. The front fender here, I chopped it front and back, pretty much just because anytime I loaded it up into the truck, this extended portion here would always hit the side of my bed, and it was just scuffing up the paint. So that's kind of why I did it. Also, if you follow Florian Bugs overseas, he kind of has a front fender like this, the chopped version of it. That's pretty much all I can say for the front end here. In terms of suspension, I really didn't notice anything. I still have both seal savers on. There's really no leaks that I've seen or anything like that, besides the like juddering feeling that I don't know if it's suspension or brakes or something on the front end or steering stem. Really no complaints on the suspension there at all. Nothing came loose. These two lower triple bolts did not loosen at all. It was just the steering stem nut. So really nothing to talk about there in terms of suspension. It did fine. I do get some front end wobble on some stoppy approaches. It's very inconsistent. It's, you know, you'll get it one time or it'll be super smooth the next time. I don't know why. I don't have a stabilizer on yet or anything like that, so one of the things that could help eliminate that. So on the top triple here, the only thing that I ended up noticing that I had an issue with was my steering stem nut. On the last lot session of the year, I came down from a wheelie and I felt like the whole front end moved or something like that. It felt weird. I just kept riding because I just kind of wanted to finish up the year and the session and not really just deal with it later. And every time I would hit the brakes or come down, I'm like hearing something shift, and I left it alone over the winter, and when I brought it home, I unloaded it. I'm like hitting the brakes and watching, and every time I hit the brakes, I'd see the whole triple shift forward, and then I go and touch this, and this thing was finger loose. Like I could just completely loosen it with my index finger, and lo and behold, that was what the issue was. So all I did was put a little bit of blue Loctite on this and then retorqued it down. But so that's something you'll probably want to check a little more often than usual. It happened a lot on my Grom. Like that thing would come loose all the time, and I don't know if it's the high vibration or the constant slamming of the front end, which that definitely probably has something to do with it. But just pay attention to that. Like if you ever feel the front end feeling a little weird or moving when you hit the brakes, it's probably this steering stem nut that kind of broke free. Throttle tube still perfect. Throttle housing great. Obviously hockey tape here. This Brembo is doing perfectly fine for the front end. These throttle cables, you can see under here, I have them loose, to be honest. This one's a little tighter. It sometimes tightens by itself, but this one kind of just comes loose, and I'll snug it like finger tight and it'll break free by itself. But that's the only way I've noticed that I can keep the throttle tube with little to no free play and then it not stick when I turn the bars left or right. I forget which way it would stick. I think to the right the throttle tube would stick if I tighten these down, but since they're loose like this, when you turn the handlebars, they will rotate with you, and you just kind of have to keep an eye on it because you don't want it to come all the way out, and then, you know, your casing here is kind of out of your throttle housing. But the whole year was kind of, I ran it like that, and I thought it would maybe be a problem, like something would go wrong, but it held up perfectly fine for me. I like little to no free play in the throttle, and to do that, I had to leave these kind of loose like that, otherwise it would the tube would stick. But that's how I have my brake lines. They come here. I had to zip tie them to the top triple, and then one goes through the inside, and I have this one coming on the outside like that, so you can see how that's run. I think it was hitting something on the bike when I had this one routed on the inside before, so I switched that, I believe. And then my reservoir goes in between the brake line and the throttle cables, and then in between there, kind of get a better angle of how that's routed like that. And then you kind of see how the clutch cable goes. I have it behind the front brake lines and then over the top of that reservoir. And really nothing changed with this. There is some HT moto that I put on my triple here because whenever I would do any tank tricks and my legs were over, I would always smack the back of my calves on this part of the triple. So hopefully that adds a little bit of cushion there and kind of keeps me from getting bruised up. But that's the only reason this stuff is here. And then in terms of handbrake, bleed your brakes a little more often, because that will bring some life back into the lever. It won't feel so mushy. And I also kind of was watching Clint Ewing, and he was talking about recently in his R6 build, he's using some like Japanese masters, and he mentioned something briefly about like Brembo's getting this mushy feeling. And that was something I always noticed, like maybe 20 minutes into a session or something like that, that the lever would just seem to like, I don't know, get softer. Like right now it's pretty firm and it stays like that for a little bit, and then the longer I'd ride, you know, I try and stop around 20 minutes and take a break and let things cool off. It would just, sometimes it would just kind of feel a little soft. Not like the performance was gone, because I would always get brake power. There was never any brake fade that I could tell, because I think I got a pretty good setup there, and I'm not, you know, dragging brake constantly. But it sounds like, according to him, that's just a Brembo thing, and that would make sense because I've bled this master and those calipers perfectly, and it seems to be like that's just a thing. So if you notice that might just be a Brembo thing. There's that little bit of play here too, which if you buy a more expensive Brembo master cylinder, there's an adjuster on it. You can change the level of play in the lever before it engages, which is kind of stupid, because why not just give it the least amount of play possible? Like, I want my brakes kind of right away. Like, I don't want to have to go through this junk and then my brakes are hitting, or give that option on all the master cylinders to adjust it. But that's pretty much all there is to the front end here. I really didn't change much. I just kind of added a couple things, and those are the things I noticed. I'll have to figure out what I want to do with my front tire and my brakes, and that's something I'll probably make a video on in the future. That's all for the front end. We'll probably work on radiator and tank and all that kind of internal stuff, cages, in the next episode, and then, you know, we'll continue our way back there. But this is the first part of the 1 year review of this F4i.
Hottest stash in the carpet. Yeah, we trapping out apartments. I ain't done where you start shit. To be honest,